Okay, obviously we've got a lot to get to. California Governor Gavin Newsom just announced he's been told Donald Trump will be deploying 2,000 National Guard troops to Los Angeles in addition to the 2,000 already sent, despite protestations and a lawsuit filed by Newsom claiming the troops only inflame the situation. The head of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, now claiming Los Angeles protests are, quote unquote, professionally done. She's saying that these demonstrators are being paid because no American could be honestly and genuinely offended by these ICE raids. The Los Angeles mayor, Karen Bass, saying her city is being used as an experiment to see what the federal government can do. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi, the attorney general, says she's opening up 9 cases in relation to the protests in Los Angeles. She didn't specify what the cases are or what the charges are, but she says they are charging 9 protesters. We're also getting reports that Steve Bannon, in an interview with the BBC, has called for the arrest of Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. There seems to be a problem with protesters hawking loogies at ICE agents around the country. Convicted felon Donald Trump warning Monday that this kind of disrespect for ICE agents will not be tolerated, telling reporters, seriously, he told reporters, if they spit, we hit. Brilliant. Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul voted against disaster relief for New Jersey and New York following 2012's Hurricane Sandy. But that didn't stop him from signing a letter Monday begging Donald Trump to provide disaster relief for Kentucky's devastated counties, devastated back in April from the floods. Donald Trump refuses to answer calls from Kentucky's Democratic Governor Andy Beshear, who is begging Trump for emergency aid. As Donald Trump declares an emergency in Los Angeles, his Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, has the largest backlog of unanswered claims in its 50-year history. After this year's tornadoes, floods, and fires, more than 1 million Americans have yet to get an answer from FEMA regarding their claims, as nearly a dozen governors, mostly from red states like Kentucky and Arkansas, are finding their calls for disaster relief going unanswered by Donald Trump. Kentucky's entire congressional delegation, including Kentucky's 2 senators, Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul, as well as all of Kentucky's House members, writing a letter to President Trump Monday asking him to finally declare a national emergency in their state due to the massive flooding in 84 Kentucky counties back in April. As I said, the Democratic governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, has repeatedly asked Trump for that declaration. So far, it's falling on deaf ears. So, no money for natural disasters, but plenty for ICE to create unnatural disasters. ICE answers to the Department of Homeland Security. ICE Homeland Security Chairman, Congressional Chairman, ICE Homeland Security House Chairman Mark Green is a Tennessee Republican. He announced on Monday he is quitting Congress. One would venture a guess that he's quitting to protest federal money spent on mass ICE arrests instead of FEMA helping people in need. But Green says he will leave immediately after Trump signs the new 2026 budget bill into law. You mean never? You mean never? Well, he's not leaving to protest the ICE arrests. He's leaving because he found work in the private sector. That's what he's claiming. Green is a conservative Christian. He claims he's leaving because he found some great work in the private sector, but his wife, Camille, just sued him for divorce, accusing the congressman of having an extramarital affair with a woman half his age. In a message that his wife sent to fellow congressional wives, the soon-to-be ex Mrs. Green wrote, quote, Satan has rewritten our marriage in my husband's mind, unquote. Satan has rewritten our marriage in my husband's mind. In her letter to close congressional friends, she warns, quote, I want to make others aware of how readily available predators are for our husbands. If my story can prevent this tragedy from happening to someone else, I will tell it, unquote. Yes, her husband, her marriage, victimized by predators and Satan, the party of personal responsibility. But when her husband cheats, it's Satan's fault. It's the predators out there who are to blame. Well, speaking of Satan, last month, Stephen Miller, White House Deputy Chief of Staff, reportedly screamed at 25 field directors from ICE's enforcement removal operations and 25 special agents from Homeland Security investigations, who Miller brought into the White House to yell and scream and ask why migrant arrests aren't keeping pace with the Biden administration's. Stephen Miller outraged that during Trump's first 100 days, despite all the violations of due process, despite kids with cancer getting separated from their parents, U.S. citizens deported and or placed in detention facilities, he wanted to know why the number of arrests were still smaller than last year's arrests during a similar period under the Biden administration. At the meeting, Miller demanded 3,000 arrests per day, saying, I don't care if the migrants are known gang members or criminals. I don't care. Arrest them anyway. This is very sad. After Miller accused all the ICE officials of being bad at their jobs, accusing them of being poor leaders, there are reports that morale among ICE leadership is down, with many in positions of jackbooted authority inside ICE feeling underappreciated, deeply offended by Stephen Miller's abusive behavior towards them. Stephen, sounds like they need a hug. Miller reportedly screamed at them, quote, why aren't you at Home Depot? Why aren't you at 7-Eleven? Now, he didn't mean, why aren't you working there, which I think they should be. I think they should all quit and find real jobs. But Miller was saying, why aren't you at Home Depot? Why aren't you at 7-Eleven arresting the people hanging out there? One ICE field officer reportedly explained in that meeting that Border Czar Tom Homan explicitly ordered them only to arrest criminals. Tom Homan also adding, my butt hurts. Yes, it most certainly does. At the top of his lungs, Stephen Miller is reported to have screamed, what do you mean you're only going after criminals? What do you mean you're only going after criminals? In other words, arrest anyone and everyone. But Trump insists they're only going after the worst of the worst. Well, if that were true, they'd be arresting Stephen Miller. ICE has picked up the pace this month. Here is Border Czar Tom Homan going undercover, doing some arrests in West Hollywood, Los Angeles on Sunday. Here he is arresting some guy named Vito late Sunday night. Here is Tom Homan leading a raid Monday in LA's Fashion District. And wait, I'm being told Tom Homan's youngest daughter, Trenchmouth Homan, is with us. Hello, Trenchmouth Homan. Thank you for joining us. What's it like having Border Czar Tom Homan for a dad? Okay, apparently a cat has her tongue and got deported. Okay, wait, I'm told Mrs. Tom Homan, who literally has the face. All due respect to women. And I love women. Start that again but this guy, before we. I am told that started to. I'm told that Mrs. Tom Homan, the wife of the Border Czar, Mrs. Tom Homan, who literally has the face of a catcher's mitt, is joining us. Mrs. Tom Homan, who has the face of a catcher's mitt, you're married to a very controversial fascist. What is it like being married to that scumbag?
Arnold Palmer was all man, and I say that in all due respect to women. And I love women, but this is a guy that was all man. This man was strong and tough, but when he took showers with the other pros, they came out of there. They said, "Oh my God, that's unbelievable." I had to say it. But we have women that are highly sophisticated here, but they used to look at Arnold. They said, "Man, but he was really something special. Arnold was something special." So I just want to tell you, you're very lucky. And I had to tell you the shower part of it, because it's true. What can I tell you? We want to be honest. We want to be upfront. It's true.
That is the wife of our border Reichsfuhrer Tom Homan, Mrs. Tom Homan, who, as you can see, literally has the face of a catcher's mitt. Well, thanks to Tom Homan's brilliant leadership as our nation's border Reichsfuhrer, ICE currently is holding 54,000 people inside its network of for-profit detention facilities run primarily by Geo Group and Core Civic, the two largest for-profit prison companies and the earliest contributors to Donald Trump's 2024 presidential campaign. Last month, border Reichsfuhrer Tom Homan urged Congress to include billions of additional funding in its 2026 budget to expand the for-profit prison network's capacity so it can hold 100,000 inmates by next year. Homan then added,
"My butt hurts."
Yes, it does. You might recall shares of Geo Group and Core Civic soared by nearly 50% the day after Donald Trump's November win, as their CEOs guaranteed shareholders lucrative contracts from ICE to build more state-of-the-art for-profit detention facilities that will result in windfall revenue for their companies. Your tax dollars hard at work. Meanwhile, no money for FEMA. No money for FEMA, but billions for the for-profit detention centers. Geo Group runs the for-profit detention facility in Elizabeth, New Jersey, where Black Congresswoman LaMonica McIver and the Black mayor of Newark, New Jersey's Ras Baraka, were both arrested last month by 20 ICE agents while attempting to inspect the conditions inside Geo Group's for-profit detention center. And what do you suppose conditions are like inside that for-profit detention facility run by Geo Group? Geo Group offers to pay some of its detainees $1 a day to perform maintenance around their jail cells. Other inmates have been offered an extra bowl of soup if they agree to do some painting. Earlier this month, the Supreme Court agreed to hear a forced labor civil lawsuit filed by former inmates of for-profit detention centers in Texas and Georgia, owned and operated by Core Civic. Apparently, Core Civic, the for-profit detention company, in order to cut costs, they are no longer offering $1 a day or an extra bowl of soup. According to the lawsuit, they are now forcing inmates to work for free. Plaintiffs in the lawsuit charge Core Civic with forcing them to perform janitorial work inside the for-profit prison or be sent into solitary confinement. I think I just gave Amazon founder Jeff Bezos an erection. I think that sentence about forcing people to work for free or get put in solitary confinement, I think I just gave Jeff Bezos an erection. The lawsuit also charges CoreCivic with depriving inmates of proper medical care, sanitary living conditions, and food. Well, if you don't want to paint, you don't get that extra bowl of soup. So, if you're searching for a rock-solid investment for your retirement fund, search no further than the for-profit prison provider CoreCivic. At CoreCivic, we put people last. I mean, these people, you got to hand it to them. They've really figured out how to cut overhead and bring down labor costs. Mexico's foreign minister says 42 Mexican citizens are currently held in ICE detention facilities following this weekend's unnecessarily sadistic ICE raids in Los Angeles. Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico's president, calling on Los Angelinos to protest these arrests peacefully. And then she urged President Trump to follow the law, to obey immigration procedures already in place. In other words, she's saying these arrests are just cruel and unnecessary. A total of 118 were arrested by ICE during this weekend's raids. They included workers, protesters, and SEIU Union President David Huerta. But you know who didn't get arrested? The people who run all those businesses employing the alleged undocumented Americans. Somehow, ICE neglected to arrest any of the business people who do the hiring. New York primaries are this Tuesday. Disgraced Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo, candidate for mayor of New York, warning that New York City is up next for ICE. He doesn't approve. Cuomo says it's wrong to grab innocent people in the middle of the night unless they work for you. Eric Adams, the current mayor of New York, now running for re-election. You might recall Adams was indicted by the Biden Justice Department last year, charged with accepting bribes from the government of Turkey and violating campaign finance law. The Trump Justice Department, however, dropped the indictment when Adams met with border Reichsfuhrer Tom Homan and then agreed to assist in the rounding up of innocent migrants despite New York City being a sanctuary. Adams was a Democrat, but in April of this year, he declared he would run for re-election in November as an independent. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman. In New York City, where Mayor Adams just declared that the New York City Police Department will not stand for the types of protests we're witnessing right now in Los Angeles. He's ordering the police department not to allow the protests we're seeing in Los Angeles. And you know what that means? Tens of millions of dollars in financial settlements with protesters, identical to the ones stemming from the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, when New York City cops, in their inimical fashion, drove patrol cars into innocent people and cracked open skulls because their wives are sleeping with the kid from DoorDash. Read the Bill of Rights. This is what New York City cops do to demonstrators, and it costs millions of dollars to settle the lawsuits. Read the Bill of Rights. Our founding fathers knew there's a very thin line between people who break the law and those who enforce it. I'm not saying all cops are criminals. I'm saying most of them are accessories after the fact. Accessories after the fact who witnessed one of their fellow officers commit a crime and then, to make life easier, not report it. Keep it secret. That's an accessory after the fact, and I'm saying most cops are accessories after the fact. The police tell us, if you see something, say something. Okay, fellas, you go first. If you see something, say something, because I just paid my taxes. And I love paying my taxes, but I live in New York. And over the past decade, my city has been forced to pay out more than $1 billion in police brutality and officer misconduct settlements. You want to take out your frustrations, fellas? I'm not paying for it. You got anger issues? Join a gym, because most cops in New York City I see could use the exercise. And a little tip if you're visiting our unfair city. If you don't want your skull cracked open, stay away specifically from short cops. If you see a short cop and you don't want your skull cracked open, stay away. Again, I have nothing against cops in general because I'm white, but I know how all cops treat all people of color. I know how all cops treat all people of color. And as a tax-paying U.S. citizen who has been arrested, I can assure you we wouldn't need so many cops if our country spent more on social workers. As a matter of fact, if we spent more on social workers, we wouldn't have so many people wanting to be cops. And by the way, here's a fun social experiment. Next time you're pulled over by a cop, ask that cop to tell you what the Fourth Amendment is. You'd be amazed how many cops cannot tell you what the Fourth Amendment is. Ask your cop as he's pulling you over, what's the Fourth Amendment? As you're pulling the baton out of your ass, you'll be shocked by how unfamiliar that cop is with the Bill of Rights. Playbook reporting Elon Musk attempting to curry favor with the Trump administration by using Twitter to repost angry messages from J.D. Vance and Donald Trump about the Los Angeles protests. Elon Musk clearly demonstrates, as you know, he clearly demonstrates that excessive ketamine use triggers a disconnect from reality. But Trump doesn't need ketamine. He was born already disconnected from reality, forcing him to invent his own. Donald Trump is not a reader, can't write, but he is a student of television, and because of the unfortunate power granted to United States Commander-in-Chief, he paints our daily news. America's 4K high-definition big screen is his canvas. Truth Social, Twitter, and an all-too-willing news media are his brushes. Donald Trump, an old-world grandmaster, like Rembrandt, a fanciful aesthetic revolutionary who, along with his crew of finely skilled apprentice artisans, churns out a daily representation of reality, forcing all of us to rage against these outlandish grotesqueries that make Bruegel the Elder seem like a mere illustrator of Hallmark greeting cards. Because Trump's daily panorama of lies have real-world consequences, not to look, ignoring him, to turn away is a disservice to both our country and his victims. Over the weekend, Trump applied a thick layer of paint, his wet dab of ICE agents unleashing unholy terror throughout Los Angeles. With one singular, pointed tip brush stroke, he devastated hundreds of innocents and triggered protests, creating the next day's cascading texture of fiery red as he smeared the National Guard all over his canvas. And now the United States Marines deployed and on high alert. Defense Chief Pete Hegseth activating 700 Task Force 51 Marines, deploying them into Los Angeles, he claims, to assist the thousands of National Guard troops. There are possibly 4,000 National Guard troops that have been sent into Los Angeles, despite objections from Gavin Newsom, marking the first time in 60 years the United States president ordered in the National Guard over the protestations of the governor. Demonstrations spreading throughout California in response to this weekend's ICE raids in Los Angeles's fashion district. In Northern California, San Francisco police say they arrested 148 protesters on Sunday, eventually releasing all but one police officer suffering minor injuries. In Chicago, a sanctuary city, its police chief telling the BBC Monday that officers there have not, will not, cooperate with ICE agents who are rounding up immigrants. Donald Trump, a convicted felon, targeting blue cities through these ICE raids in a desperate attempt to create disturbances that he can then spin, accusing Democratic leaders of being soft on crime. The BBC reporting that House Democrat Jesus Garcia, representing parts of Chicago, led protests against ICE raids there on Monday. Congressman Garcia calling Trump's border policy, quote, cruelty with intent. He warned of agent provocateurs hired to turn peaceful protests into violent ones in order to justify Trump sending in the National Guard. We know the playbook. We know the playbook. Jack Blanchard and Dasha Burns writing over at Politico that this is the fight Trump has been looking for. Trump, they say, knew the ICE raids in Los Angeles would justify sending in the National Guard. The Los Angeles Times reporting California Governor Gavin Newsom now suing Trump over the deployment of National Guard troops in Los Angeles. California Attorney General Rob Bonta filed the suit, which names both Donald Trump and Defense Chief Pete Hegseth as the defendants. The BBC reporting California Attorney General Rob Bonta insisting the Los Angeles Police Department succeeded in tamping down the protests and that Trump, along with Hegseth, went out of their way to flame passions by sending in the National Guard. Bonta telling reporters, quote, let me be clear. There is no invasion. There is no rebellion. The president is trying to manufacture chaos and crisis on the ground for his own political ends. The BBC reports Rob Bonta's lawsuit. He's the California Attorney General. His lawsuit against Trump accuses the president of violating states' rights, exceeding his limited authority according to the 10th Amendment. California Governor Newsom said by ordering the ICE raids and then sending in the National Guard, despite his not wanting it, despite Newsom saying, don't send in the National Guard, Newsom saying Trump is, quote, creating the conditions he claims to be solving. We know the fascist playbook. Gavin Newsom knows the fascist playbook. We all know. We're on to you, Donald Trump. You're not an original. Gavin Newsom telling reporters, quote, we didn't have a problem until Trump got involved. This is a serious breach of state sovereignty, inflaming tensions while pulling resources from where they're actually needed, unquote. The BBC reporting Gavin Newsom is urging other governors in blue states to speak out against Donald Trump sending the National Guard into Los Angeles. Governor Newsom warned that this order, sending troops into Los Angeles, if you read the order, it allows Trump to deploy troops into any city Trump decides. Gavin Newsom saying, quote, every governor, red or blue, should reject this outrageous overreach. This, he went on to say, is an unmistakable step toward authoritarianism that threatens the foundation of our republic. We cannot let it stand, unquote. According to the Los Angeles Times, when the demonstrations first began this weekend, Newsom told protesters, quote, "The president is attempting to inflame passions and provoke a response. He wants the violence. He thinks it's good for him politically," unquote. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass told protesters, quote, "My Angelenos, don't engage in violence and chaos. Don't give the administration what they want." The Daily Beast reporting Newsom and Trump spoke early Saturday morning at around 1 a.m. for 20 minutes, with Newsom saying Trump never once mentioned sending in the National Guard. The Daily Beast reporting Governor Newsom now calling Trump a stone-cold liar. Newsom saying, quote, "There's no working with this president. There's only working for him, and I will never work for Donald Trump." Border czar Tom Homan threatening to arrest Newsom after he said that. Homan said if Newsom gets in the way of ICE agents doing their jobs, he's going to get arrested. Gavin Newsom responding to Tom Homan's threats, saying, quote, "He's a tough guy. Why doesn't he do that? He knows where to find me. Lay your hands off 4-year-old girls who are trying to get an education and come after me instead. Arrest me. Let's just get it over with, tough guy," unquote. 4-year-old girls trying to get an education. Well, they are doing that. They are arresting 4-year-old girls. But Homan literally deported a 4-year-old American citizen suffering from stage 4 cancer. That's who Tom Homan is. Donald Trump responding to Homan's threat, telling reporters, quote, "I would do it. I would arrest him. I would arrest Gavin if I were Tom Homan. I think it's a great idea. You know, Gavin likes the publicity. I like Gavin Newsom. He's a nice guy, but he's grossly incompetent. I wouldn't mind if he got arrested," unquote. Donald Trump echoing Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller's initial description of the protests as an insurrection. Miller called it an insurrection before the protests even started. Now, Donald Trump calling it an insurrection. Trump taking to social media promising to liberate Los Angeles from the migrant invasion. And this is how fascists attempt to control. This is how fascists try to control our reality. There's a playbook, and we're on to Donald Trump. They edit the gene sequencing of truth by manipulating words, calling the protests an insurrection, calling immigrants who are just working in a factory sewing shirts in the LA fashion district, they call that a migrant invasion. Didn't arrest any of the people who hired these immigrants. He calls it a migrant invasion. Trump is attempting to deprive Americans of the vocabulary of reality. Why? Because that's what fascists do. It's part of the playbook. They're calling what's going on with the protests an insurrection. Under the United States Penal Code, insurrection is defined as an organized violent uprising against the United States government. Protests with some bad actors setting fire to police cars, bad actors who are not part of the protest movement, but rather using the protests as an opportunity to be bad actors, do not an insurrection make. January 6th was an insurrection. It's why the heads of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers were convicted of seditious conspiracy. There is also a difference between civil disobedience and insurrection. Blocking ICE agents from doing their jobs, like David Huerta, the union leader in Los Angeles, was arrested for doing, that doesn't constitute an insurrection. That is nonviolent civil disobedience which our nation celebrates going all the way back to Henry David Thoreau. Forcing the police to arrest you for nonviolent activity is part of the First Amendment. There is that's a picture of Jane Fonda getting arrested. I want to be wherever she is. I follow Jane Fonda. The right wing believes a heavily armed citizenry is what keeps the police and the government terrified of the citizens. They believe arming citizens is what keeps the government in line. So you end up with armed militia, like the Bundy family, pointing guns at federal agents. But the left, liberals, believe instead of guns, you stand up to government overreach by peacefully standing in the way, getting yourself arrested, distracting ICE, serving as speed bumps so they can't arrest the migrants. That is what freedom looks like. That is the constitutionally protected conversation with the government our founding fathers want us to engage in. The job of our leaders is to de-escalate tension. The job of our police is to de-escalate tension. But Donald Trump, like all fascists, is a failure. So he needs these protests. He needs these protests to turn violent. And if that means he must spark the flame for the protests to turn violent, he will have no problem lighting the match. Whatever it takes to distract Americans from a budget bill that throws millions into poverty, a budget bill that throws millions off Medicaid and food stamps, while at the same time cutting nearly $5 trillion in taxes for the rich, whatever it takes to distract Americans from that reality. Trump knows exactly what he's doing because he has no idea of what he's supposed to be doing. He only knows how to deflect. He has yet to negotiate a single trade deal. He promised peace in Ukraine and Gaza on day one. Now he's humiliated by how intransigent Putin, Netanyahu, and Hamas are turning out to be. The fading memory of low information Americans now jolted. Voters saying, oh, right, I forgot. Trump's an incompetent D-bag. And so, like all fascists, Donald Trump, a convicted felon, must present to the world he and only he can restore order to the chaos he created. Hitler used the Spanish Civil War to test his weapons. Trump has been using the past 100-day illegal war on migrants to test his emergency powers. He first made ICE agents come in the middle of the night and deny due process to migrants under the phony rubric of stopping an enemy invasion. That then sets the stage for what's going on right now, for him to invoke emergency powers and suspend habeas corpus for U.S. citizens, the way Lincoln did during the Civil War. But this time, Trump does it under the phony rubric of an insurrection. Responding to Trump sending in the National Guard, Brian Schatz, the Democratic senator from Hawaii, said, quote, "Don't kid yourself. Republicans know they are absolutely getting cooked politically with their terrible bill and rising prices, and they want to create a violent spectacle to feed their content machine. It's time for the mainstream media to describe this authoritarian madness accurately," unquote. Sunday, Trump met with his military leaders at Camp David. on board Air Force One. He said he's not ruling out the invocation of the Insurrection Act, which would give him the unlimited power he needs to round up American citizens. Trump referring to the protesters not just as insurrectionists, but also calling the demonstrations in Los Angeles the migrant riots. He's calling them the migrant riots, and it's straight out of the Dr. Joseph Goebbels playbook. The migrant riots slightly alter the definition of what's going on, while at the same time make sure there's a germ of truth in your definition of what's going on. Now, these are protests against the treatment of migrants. They're not the migrant riots. Some of the protests we saw over the weekend, for whatever reason, can be described as violent. Nobody was killed. It wasn't January 6th, but you could, if you squint really hard, call the protests peppered with some violence. So one could call these, theoretically, the migrant riots. It's a stretch, but you could call them riots, because if you want to have a loose definition of a riot and you're watching Fox News, you could call them riots, because these are protests against the treatment of migrants that slightly turned riotous. You could call them the migrant riots. He is getting good advice on twisting words. He can get away with calling what's going on in Los Angeles the migrant riots. And the resulting effect of calling the protests the migrant riots is low information Americans are left with the impression that it is the migrants who are rioting, thereby making the migrants appear dangerous, which they are not. This, calling the demonstration the migrant riots, tricks low information, racist Americans into craving martial law. Someone is advising Trump on how to parse his language. I don't know who it is. It's probably Frank Luntz, America's Dr. Joseph Goebbels, Frank Luntz. But some fascistic wordsmith, probably the reprehensible homunculus Frank Luntz, someone is advising Donald Trump to call these the migrant riots. But these are not migrant riots. It's not migrants who are protesting. It is American citizens around the country, freedom-loving, patriotic American citizens protesting all over the country yesterday against the treatment of migrants. It is just a handful of bad actors that include, most definitely, right-wing agent provocateurs who try to turn these peaceful protests into riots so that Trump and Fox can call for martial law. Never Trumper and former Bush speechwriter David Frum warning in the Atlantic magazine yesterday, quote, "If Trump can incite disturbances in blue states before the midterm elections, he can assert emergency powers to impose federal control over the voting process, which is to say, his control. Or he might suspend voting until, in his opinion, order has been restored. Either way, blue state seats could be rendered vacant for some time," unquote. Pretty ominous warning, but I don't think it's going to get that bad. I think this is a test. It is a test of what we as a nation value. Do we value real liberty or the liberty for corporations to rob us blind with no government agency protecting us? Do we value real freedom of speech, the right to demonstrate and petition our government? Or do we value the freedom to lie, to twist language, calling civil disobedience an insurrection? Are we a nation of law and order, or do we allow convicted felons to use the term law and order as a cudgel to rob us blind while stripping away our constitutional rights? I think as a people, Americans are stupid. I think our nation is overflowing with amoral people who don't know right from wrong, people who are intellectually and spiritually lazy. But I have faith that a majority of Americans are better than Trump and the people who support him. And that's not saying much. It's not that difficult to be better than Trump and the deplorables who vote for him. There are more of us than there are of them. Trump has never cracked 50%. His approval ratings have always been underwater. For the past decade, he's always been underwater. He has yet to win the popular vote by topping 50%. He only got 48.5% of the vote in 2024. In 2020, he only got 46.8% of the vote. In 2016, again, he got about 46.1% of the vote. Biden topped 51% of the vote in 2020. Obama topped 51% of the vote in 2012. In 2008, Obama got more than 53% of the vote. There are more of us than there are of them when we turn out. And Trump knows that. He wants us silent. He wants you to be afraid to speak out. He wants you afraid to speak out. I say speak, march, peacefully and joyfully. Be Jane Fonda. Be Jane Fonda. Be Jane Fonda. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you for listening to me. If you enjoyed any of this show, please hit the like button so I remain in your feed. Please share it with social media. I keep telling you it's getting harder and harder for a show like this to find its audience. So I need some help here. Please share these episodes with your friends, your grandparents, your parents, your grandparents, your grandchildren. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil over there. And leave a comment. I read all your comments. So please, if I made a mistake, I don't think I made one today, but if you found a mistake, I issue corrections on this show. So let me know what you think also. Subscribe to this channel. Subscribe to my newsletter. Thank you so much for listening to me peacefully call your members of Congress. Make your voice heard peacefully.